She had been out to lunch with Marguerite when Juliet had called her in a state of extreme anxiety. "Doc, you gotta come back quick. There's a situation at the clinic." Maggie looked up from her steak, the waiter turning a little green as she cut into the very, very rare meat, and marveled at the texture. "What's wrong, Juliet? Is it one of my special clients?" She couldn't help but picture the dark-haired man, the one who made her feel like her fillings were vibrating, sitting on her couch and talking about things that she couldn't know, things he would have no way to know. It's Sheriff Guthrie. He's brought someone here and says he needs you to help with something." Winter rolled her eyes. Sheriff Guthrie was an element in Kashmir outside her control, and that wasn't something that happened often. Sheriff Guthrie was a transplant, one of the few people to just arrive in Kashmir, and he had attached himself to the local sheriff's department not long after. He had experience and a lengthy resume, so the previous sheriff, Sheriff Masterson, had given him a shot. He was a little overzealous for her taste, but Masterson had liked him, and Winter tried not to interfere in the town politics any more than she had to. When the sheriff disappeared a couple of months ago, the circumstances were murky at best. Deputy Guthrie had stepped in as temporary sheriff until Masterson was found, or the next election cycle could weed him out. So far, he'd done a passable job. A passable job up until now. "Temporary Sheriff Guthrie is aware that I have office hours and appointments, isn't he?" Juliet was quiet for a moment, someone speaking in a low, pissy voice, before coming back to the phone. "The sheriff says he'll be happy to pay you for the session, but it's a matter of public safety and requires your assistance immediately." Winter sighed. It appeared there was no dodging this one. "Very well, Juliet. Tell the sheriff that I will be there in 10 minutes. She hung up on Juliet and turned to find Maggie watching her pensively. "Is something wrong, my love?" she asked, her worry at odds with the look of ecstasy on her face as she devoured the steak. "That was Juliet. Apparently I'm needed back at the clinic. Some kind of emergency involving the temporary sheriff." Maggie wrinkled her nose. "I do not like him. He is odd, and sometimes when he sees me, it is like he knows I am not like him," she said, struggling to find the right words. Winter hadn't considered that, but Maggie had got her thinking about it. Guthrie often smiled, his hands in his pockets, as he projected that lazy, good old boy attitude that was so prevalent in this area. But she couldn't deny that he often seemed like he knew something that he shouldn't. It was nothing she could prove. He never said anything incriminating, but it was a feeling that she couldn't shake. I'm not the biggest fan of our stand-in lawman, but he is effective at keeping the peace. Let me see what's so important, and I'll see you at dinner. She kissed her on the forehead, her face red with blood, and paid the bill on the way out. Dr. Pamela Winters would never have it said that she was a cheap date. She arrived at the clinic 10 minutes later to find Sheriff Guthrie, Deputy Parks, and a pale, twitchy young man in one of her exam rooms. The kid was dressed in hiking clothes, one of his feet free of both boot and sock, and he looked as if he had rolled through a thorn bush recently. There was blood on his cheek, a long cut running behind his ear and up to the hairline, and scratches across his arm and legs and face. He looked like he'd been to war instead of the woods. "Sheriff Guthrie," Dr. Winters said pleasantly, "and Deputy Parks, too. What was so important that I had to cancel my lunch date?" Amos Guthrie was not some fat-bodied boss hog type of lawman. She had seen him running most mornings, passing him on her way to work, and she knew that his arms were corded with muscle, as were his legs. He had hooked his thumbs into his belt, smiling at her from under his thick blonde mustache, and giving her a casual once-over that held none of the usual greedy lecherousness others exhibited. Winter was aware that she was an attractive woman, but when Guthrie assessed her, it always seemed like he was preparing for a fight. A fight he intended to win. "Sorry for the hassle, Doc," he said, his accent on full display, "but we had a little something we were hoping you could help us with." "And what might that be?" Winter asked, her smile frosty. "Dr. Winters," he said, turning to motion a hand at the young man, "this is David Wilde. He went missing in the woods a few days ago, and when we found him, he had quite a story for us. We were hoping you could help him make sense of it. Maybe use your special talents to help him understand what he saw exactly." Winter raised an eyebrow at him, wondering how this one had heard about her services. Guthrie was not a client, but she supposed she already knew the answer. Deputy Parker, a man whose thick black mustache did nothing to hide his sheepish expression, was a client, and he had probably told Guthrie that Winter could help. She'd have to have a talk with him about that, but for now, she guessed that she could play along. She walked over to the area where she prepared her tea and trusted that Guthrie would follow. He seemed almost happy to oblige. "Just what the hell is this about?" Winter said, lowering her voice as she fixed tea mechanically. Guthrie looked back at Parks and the kid, giving his deputy a nod before continuing. "Kid saw something, and it's something I would rather he not take home with him. There's weird stuff in those woods. You know that as well as I do. And if he goes home talking about creatures in the woods and strange things in the Pine Barrens," Winter almost dropped her teapot. "How the hell did he get to the Pine Barrens?" Guthrie looked over his shoulder again, checking to make sure that no one had heard her. "I don't know, but that's where he claims to have been. We still haven't found his brother, so we can only assume he might still be there. We need this kid to forget where he was, forget what he saw, or the next people that go into those woods might come back with footage of what may or may not be out there." Winter understood now. Guthrie was asking her to help him maintain some of the security around here, and Winter wasn't opposed to it. She had misgivings about Guthrie, but about Kashmir there were no such hesitations. This was her home, her place, and she would defend it tooth and nail if need be. "We do not make a habit of this, do you understand?" she said, and Guthrie nodded solemnly. "And you absolutely will pay me for this session," she added, which made him laugh. Wouldn't dream of cheating the town's favorite doctor. Winter went back to making tea as Guthrie went back to join Parks. When she brought the cup back, Guthrie looked longingly at the pot. "Smells exotic. I could stand for a cup of Amos Wayland Guthrie," she half-whispered, and she saw him shudder as she pronounced his name with the weight of a spell. "As much as I would love to watch you spill your guts in my office, this tea isn't for you. This tea is only for people who want to forget." She looked back at the hiker. The sheriff had called him David and handed him the cup. "Have some tea, David. You'll need your strength so you can tell me what you saw." His hands shook as he took the cup, and after a single hard blow across the steam, he took a sip before beginning. "My brother and we went to the Pine Barrens. I don't know what we saw, but we... Why don't you start from the beginning? I find that sometimes it's easier when we start where it all began." David nodded, took another sip, and started over. "My brother and I are avid hikers. We've been across the country hiking deserts, forests, basins, coastlines, even a stretch of tundra in Alaska. You name it, and if it's in the United States, we've hiked it. That's what brought us here. We were looking for a challenge. Josh and I had hiked the Appalachian Trail about 2 years ago, and some guys we met on the trail, guys from Kashmir, had some crazy stories about hiking in their local woods. They talked about strange creatures, weird flora they had seen, and even how they'd been chased by something that sounded like a mountain lion. They made it sound so exotic, so alien, that Josh and I had to check it out. Well, Josh did. After listening to them about Kashmir, he got a little obsessed. He did a lot of research on the place, looking at maps and travel information, but he could never get as much as he wanted. He wanted to know everything, but there wasn't a lot of information online about Kashmir. It's weird, this whole town is like a blip, and the people who live here don't talk about it much. The one thing the guys did talk about, though, was the Pine Barrens. They said they had gone there as kids, scouts even, and that they had seen some weird lights and strange creatures there. That's where they got chased, actually. They got a little too close to the place, and whatever lived there didn't like it. They barely made it out, they said, and their scoutmaster hadn't been happy about it. He told them that they were never to go near the Pine Barrens again, and had canceled the rest of the trip just in case something had followed them back. They never found it again. They had been super young and couldn't remember exactly where they had been, but Josh was intrigued. When we were planning our trip this year, he said he wanted to finally go see Kashmir, and I was definitely game. We flew into Atlanta, rented a truck, bought some camping stuff, and headed out for Kashmir. We saw the sights, went to the botanical gardens, drove close enough to see Stagview, walked around that super haunted hospital you guys have, and when we had explored all of the town, well, as much as we wanted to, we hit the woods. Josh was pretty sure he knew where the Pine Barrens were. Some Google map searching and led him to believe that he'd found the right spot. So we left our rental truck in the town and headed for the outskirts on foot. We camped the first night in a large clearing about 20 miles from Stagview, near a scout camp in the East Woods. I've slept in a lot of places, in tents, under the stars, in caves, even with a canopy of trees over me, but I've never actually felt unsafe while camping. I don't mean wary. You have to be wary when you're in the wilderness, but what I felt was unsafe, in danger, as if my life might end at any moment. We lay in the tent, our bags zipped up as we sweated in the summer heat, and watched the shadows pace around us. They were lean, looking like panthers or cougars, and they seemed to drink the air as they stalked our tent. I believe, now that I've actually seen them, that they might be blind, running completely on smell and sound. But that night, I couldn't understand how we weren't discovered. They stalked us for nearly 3 hours, bumping into the tent with their weird bullet-shaped heads, and when they left, I felt like I would never be able to sleep. Somehow I caught a few hours, but when I told Josh that we should leave after we had packed up in the morning, he refused. "Go back if you want. I want to see this Pine Barren." He headed off in the direction he thought it should be, and as I followed behind him, I asked why it meant so much to him. He'd never even seen it. Why did he need to find it so badly? "I may not have seen it," he said, eyes ahead, "but I've dreamed about it. It's weird, you know, to dream about a place that you've never seen in life. I have to see it. If I don't find it, I think I might go crazy, Dave." I think that was when I realized what this meant to him. This wasn't just an interest, it had become a true obsession to him. If I didn't go with him, he'd go on by himself, and After the night before, I wasn't sure if I'd ever see him again. So we trekked into the woods, the day escaping us as we went deeper and deeper into the east woods. The maps say the woods should be less than 10 miles from edge to edge, but they seem to go on forever. There are roads that run through those woods, but we never found them. The woods around Stragview are strange indeed, but the strangest sight was yet to come. It was getting dark, the sun riding low, and I had just opened my mouth to suggest that we might need to make camp when Josh stopped in his tracks. We were about 5 feet apart, the trees thinning out some, and he was standing on a little rise and looking ahead as I came up beside him. Up ahead was a patch of leaning pines, a small scratch amongst the birches and firs, and amidst the pines was a deep trench. It was a long, jagged cut in the earth, and it looked deep enough to reach all the way to hell. A movement around that hole pulled my eye to the left, and that was when I first saw them. My earlier assessment had been right. They were long and lean, powerfully built, and their bullet-shaped heads split open to reveal mouthfuls of jagged teeth. They sniffed the air, their snouts high, and the cry they loosed sent a shiver to my core. Those on the outside started tearing towards us, but I could see others pulling themselves out of the hole to join them. They were staying a step ahead of the setting sun, not seeming to like the feel of it, but it wouldn't stop them much longer. They'd seen us or smelled us, that much was clear, and Josh was making no effort to hide. I grabbed his hand, trying to pull him back, but he broke my grasp, and to my shock started running towards the creatures. I took a step towards him, trying to catch hold of him again, but as the creatures got closer, as he got closer to them, I started sprinting in the other direction. I didn't want him to get my brother, but I didn't want him to get me either. I was running off of pure instinct, flying into the depths of the woods with no real destination. And as I ran, I heard that hellish pack in the distance behind me. I was running off pure adrenaline then, stumbling heedlessly into the woods. As the light disappeared around me, the dark swallowing me up, I felt like I was running blind too. I was panicked, not sure what was going on, and I had no clue how long I ran through that darkness. When the ground suddenly disappeared out from under me, I could hear the beasts closing in on me. I fell into empty air, the moon showing me a gorge below me. I remember being relieved somehow that they wouldn't get me, and I would be allowed to die without those monsters getting to eat me. It came to the next morning, having fallen into a thorn bush. It had stopped my fall, but it had cut me up pretty badly. I pulled myself out and started limping along the bottom of the gorge. That's when the Rangers found me. That's how the police found me. The kid had been gagging for the last few minutes or so, and as his story came to a close, he made a choking sound and brought up the memory. It plopped into his cup, and Winter had it swooped away and over to the other side of the room before he could come around. It was small, discolored by the adrenaline and fear, but still serviceable. It would serve her needs, as they all did, and she found herself looking at it in the way that Maggie looked at a steak. She hated herself for it, but she could no more fight her nature than her lover could. The two officers watched her pensively, clearly not sure what to make of what they had just seen. "I expect you boys will keep what you saw here to yourself," she said, putting enough emphasis on it that they could read the quiet part clearly. "Of course," Sheriff Guthrie said, "as long as maybe we can depend on you for more consulting work in the future." Winter had expected as much and nodded. There were worse ways to make money, When he comes out of that, tell him that you found him wandering in the woods after being lost. He'll believe it, but I recommend that you be on your way to the hospital when you tell him." Guthrie took the hint, and they shuffled him out quickly, promising to settle up before sunset. Winter sighed as she put David Wilde's memory into a fresh jar. It bumped against a dustier vessel, and she was unsurprised to see the faded tape across it read Masterson. She took it out, replaced the new jar with the old, and looked at the slowly flashing red lump inside that jar. Masterson had been such a dear, such a broken mess of a man when she found him on that bench in Amarillo. He was still wearing the uniform, blood on the front and on the pants, but the stubble and the bottle of whiskey tucked into the bag told her that he might have been at this a while. He had looked up at her as she sat beside him, his eyes lost and childlike, and as she took the lid off the jar, she heard the same thing vibrate from the liquid inside as it had vibrated from his chapped lips that afternoon in 1987. "I didn't mean to shoot that kid. I thought he was with him. I turned and fired, and he just fell down, scared and cold, and asking me why." Masterson had been the sheriff in Kashmir for a long time. Too long, she supposed. He'd been a good lawman, and he'd known how to de-escalate a situation in a way that this new one would never learn. He had valued peace, not strife, and sometimes it almost seemed to flow from him like a cooling river. He had possessed a laugh that you could feel in your bones, a steadiness that could give you courage, and a quiet authority like no one she had ever known. She tilted the glass, feeling his memory slide into her, and she trembled as she drew in his power. It was warm and rich, and when she opened her eyes, she suddenly knew that he would never be back to leave another. He was gone beyond her, and that made her a little sad. As she washed out the jar, she wondered what sort of memories she could get from this new sheriff, this strutting peacock that was Amos Guthrie. She might have to find out, and find out what such a memory could be used for. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. I'm glad you made it to the end of the story. Thanks for stopping by. If you think you might like a little more spooky in your life, well, there should be some links popping up at the end of this to other great stories, maybe even some great playlists that you can discover. We update 7 nights a week, so there's always something new and something spooky waiting for you on the channel. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, there should be some links to Amazon down in my description, so go have a look over there. It should get you to all my latest books. Speaking of books, I've got my first horror novel, Towsy Homestead, available for purchase on Amazon. It's my first horror novel, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd go give it a look and maybe give it a buy too. If you'd like to support the channel, we have a subscription program here on YouTube, but we've also got a Patreon with lots of tiers and lots of different rewards. For example, our Spooky Skeleton contributors get their spooky 12 hours early. That's right, they get their videos at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. Ghostly Reader tier contributors, that's a tier that's only available on Patreon, I'm afraid, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep, hopefully in a timely manner. So, however you support the channel, whether it's monetarily or by enjoying our great videos here, thank you so much. Speaking of patrons, before we go, let's go ahead and thank them. Thanks to Sara, Unicorn Hollow, JustAmy, and Cinnamon Fox for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Shannon McGhee, Janet, Lee Kendall, Ronda J, Sue Casper, Valinar, CleoHarperReturns, Sara, and Queen Sheebah for being our spooky skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, Queen Sheebah, MissNewBooty, and Alex Connor for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.